Around 4,500 years ago, an old man sat down and wrote about what it felt like to grow old. And what he wrote could have been posted on the internet this morning. He said his eyes were growing weak, his ears were going deaf, his strength was failing, his mouth had fallen silent, his mind was forgetting yesterday, his bones ached. And then he wrote the line that reaches across 45 centuries and grabs you by the collar. Everything that once tasted sweet, he said, now tastes bitter. That man was an Egyptian official named Ptahhotep, and his complaint about old age is one of the oldest pieces of writing on the subject that survives. 4,500 years of human progress, pyramids built and fallen, empires risen and gone, the invention of everything, and growing old still feels exactly the same. The body fails, the senses dim, and the things you used to love lose their flavor. So what actually happened to you if you grew old in ancient Egypt? In a world with no pensions, no retirement homes, no hospitals, no glasses, no hearing aids, what did old age look like? Who took care of you? And was getting old in Egypt a blessing or a quiet kind of horror? The answer might change how you think about your own. Let's start with the most important question. How old is old in ancient Egypt? Because the answer is grim. Life was short, brutally short by our standards. The average life expectancy hovered somewhere around the mid-30s, but that number is misleading because it's dragged down massively by death in childhood. So many babies and young children died that the average gets crushed. If you could survive the deadly gauntlet of early childhood, the diseases, the infections, the parasites, you had a decent shot at reaching your 50s or 60s. And a lucky, hardy few lived into their 70s and beyond. But here's the thing. Even at 50 or 60, an Egyptian was old in a way we can barely imagine. Their bodies were wrecked far earlier than ours. A lifetime of brutal physical labor, of a gritty diet that ground their teeth to painful stumps, of untreated diseases and old injuries that never healed right. It aged them hard and fast. A 60-year-old Egyptian farmer had the worn-out joints, the bad back, the failing teeth, and the bent spine of someone we'd consider far older. They reached old age battered. The wonder isn't that they complained about it. It's that so many endured it with such grace. And yet, and this is the beautiful part, the Egyptians genuinely revered old age. In fact, they idealized it. To the Egyptians, a long life was one of the greatest blessings the gods could grant. The ideal lifespan, the one they wished for in their prayers and blessings, was 110 years. That was the magic number, the perfect, complete life. Almost nobody actually reached it, of course. It was more of a sacred ideal than a real expectation. But the fact that it existed tells you everything. To wish someone 110 years was the highest blessing you could give. Old age wasn't something to dread or hide from. It was the prize. It meant the gods had favored you, that you had lived rightly, that you had won. The elderly were treated with deep respect. Age brought wisdom, experience, and authority. Older men held the most senior positions. Viziers, high priests, advisors to the pharaoh were often old men, valued precisely for their decades of accumulated knowledge. Gray hair commanded respect. The wisdom of the old was written down and taught to the young, like the very advice of Ptahhotep, which despite his complaints about aging, was treasured as a guide to living well. To be old was to be a living library, a source of guidance, the keeper of how things were done. But respect doesn't feed you or carry you when your legs give out. So who actually took care of the elderly? The answer is simple, and it rested entirely on one institution: the family. There was no state safety net, no retirement fund, no care homes, When you got too old to work, your survival depended completely on your children, and above all, on your eldest son. This was so central to Egyptian life that it had a name. The duty of a son to care for his aging parents was a sacred obligation, and the son who fulfilled it was honored with a beautiful title. He was called the Staff of Old Age, the support a parent could lean on, literally and figuratively, when their own strength was gone. Picture that image. As you weaken and stoop, your child becomes the staff that holds you up. It's one of the tenderest ideas in the entire civilization. Parents raised children partly with the explicit understanding that those children would one day be their walking stick, their provider, their protector in the frailty of old age. And it went beyond just food and shelter. The eldest son had another, even more crucial duty, one that extended past death itself. He was responsible for arranging his parents' burial and for maintaining their tomb and their memory afterward, bringing offerings so their soul could survive in the afterlife. So caring for your aging parents wasn't just about their comfort in this life, it was about securing their eternity in the next. A good son guaranteed both your old age and your immortality. Now you understand why having children, especially sons, was so desperately important in Egypt. Your children weren't just your legacy, they were your retirement plan and your ticket to eternal life, all in one. This created a powerful two-way bond. Parents poured everything into raising their children well, and children grew up knowing that one day the roles would reverse, that the people who had carried them would need to be carried. It's a cycle so human, so familiar, that it needs no explanation. We live it still. But let's not pretend it was gentle for everyone. Because for all the reverence, the physical reality of old age in Egypt was hard. If your eyes failed, there were no glasses. You simply went blind, or close to it, and lived in a blur. If your hearing went, there were no hearing aids. You sank into silence. The aches and pains we numb with a pill were, for them, just permanent companions, dulled only by herbs and the rough medicine of the day. The teeth, worn down by that sandy bread, caused agony with no real dentistry to fix it. And while the wealthy could grow old in relative comfort, cared for by servants and family, surrounded by their estate, the poor elderly faced a much harsher road. If you were poor and had no surviving children, if disease or accident had taken your sons before they could become your staff, old age could be a frightening, lonely, and desperate place. The family was the safety net, and if the family was gone, there was often nothing beneath you at all. The Egyptians, being Egyptians, also refused to simply accept the decay of age. They fought it. Their medical papyri contain recipes that are unmistakably anti-aging treatments, the world's first attempts at cosmetic rejuvenation. There's a famous recipe described as a remedy to transform an old man into a youth, promising to smooth wrinkles and restore the skin. It involved special oils and plant extracts ground together and applied to the face. Did it actually reverse aging? Of course not. But pause on what it reveals. 4,000 years ago, people were mixing up face creams and chasing the promise of looking young again. The multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry in your bathroom cabinet right now has its roots in an Egyptian trying to rub the years off his face. They dyed their graying hair, too, with concoctions meant to restore its color. The desire to stay young, to resist the mirror, is not a modern vanity. It is at least as old as the pyramids. And running underneath everything was a quiet comfort the Egyptians held on to, one that made aging and death easier to face. They believed that old age and death were not the end, but a doorway. The frail, failing body you endured in your final years was temporary. If you lived a good life, passed the judgment of the afterlife, and your family maintained your memory, you would be reborn into eternity, young again, whole again, restored to your prime, living forever in a perfect version of Egypt. The aches, the dimming eyes, the bitter taste of everything sweet, all of it would fall away. Old age was just the last hard chapter before the body was renewed forever. That belief gave the elderly something precious, the sense that the suffering was not pointless, and that the best was, in a strange way, still to come. So step back and look at the whole picture of growing old by the Nile. You aged early, and you aged hard, your body broken by a lifetime of labor. But you were not discarded. You were honored, your wisdom valued, your gray hair respected, your long life seen as a gift from the gods and proof of a life well lived. Your children became your staff, holding you up as you once held them, feeding you, sheltering you, and promising to carry your memory into eternity. You rubbed creams on your wrinkles and dyed your hair, refusing to go quietly. And you faced the end believing it wasn't an ending at all, just the last tired stretch before you woke up young forever. Now think about what that means for us. We've added decades to the human lifespan. We have the glasses, the hearing aids, the painkillers, the surgeries, the creams that actually do a little something, the care homes and the pensions the Egyptians could only dream of. By every physical measure, growing old today is easier and longer and more comfortable than it has ever been in the history of our species. And yet, in another way, we may have lost something they had. Because the Egyptians never doubted that the old belonged at the center of the family. That a parent grown frail was a sacred trust, not a burden to be managed. That to be your parent's staff of old age was an honor, not an inconvenience. In a world obsessed with youth that did its aging quietly and out of sight, the Egyptians put the elderly where they believed they belonged, close, cared for, and revered. 4,500 years ago, an old man named Ptahhotep wrote down his aches, his fading senses, his grief that nothing tasted sweet anymore. We still feel every word of it. But he wrote those words surrounded by a family who saw his old age as a blessing, and a son who had become his staff. Which raises the only question that really matters, across all those thousands of years. When the people we love grow old, and when we do, will we do the same?